Hello and welcome to this tutorial, which is going to be going over some of the basics and how to make 3D models in the Design Workspace in Autodesk Fusion. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay. Now that we're in Fusion here, notice that we have the selection of different potential workspaces right here on the left. So we are in the Design Workspace by default, but we have these other ones as well. So just make sure that you're in the Design Workspace. Now, even though we're in the Design Workspace, there's still other sub-workspaces that we could possibly be working in. We are by default here in the Solid Model section, which is where we're actually going to be doing all of our work. All of our work is going to be kind of in this section here. But there is an entire different section for surface models, one for meshes, another area for work doing sheet metal designs, and then there's an environment for plastic, designing plastic objects. And then there's some utilities and things like that. And really, what's nice about this is that it kind of separates it so that you kind of just have the tools available for the different type of modeling that you're going to be doing. And these types of modeling are actually quite different. So it really does separate them very nicely. So in the solid modeling environment, we have these different sections here. We have create, automate, modify, assemble, configure, construct, inspect, and insert. And we are going to be working through not all of these because there's a lot of different settings in here. There's a lot of different potential tools in here, but we'll go over some of the basics. First things first, let's look at the browser bar here. So at the top of the browser bar is our kind of like our root object. Right now it's not saved, and so I'm going to go ahead and save it. I'll save this. And let's call it CAD example 1. And I'll save it there. So we have CAD example 1. And if I expand the browser, I can see that I have my document settings and I can change my units. Here, my active units are inches, and I'm going to keep them in inches. That's fine. Now, the origin is here. I can turn it on or I can turn it off. And to get started, let's just make a 2D drawing, and then we can do different things with it. If we look in the Create menu here, these are all the potential things you can do with different 2D objects in order to make 3D objects. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with a sketch. That's where most 3D objects start, is by starting with a 2D sketch and then doing something to make it 3D. So let's go to Create Sketch. Also notice that in the above Create here, there's like a few large buttons, and these are just the most common, I think, buttons from this big list, the ones that you'll use most often. So you see Create Sketch, the icon right here is actually the same one as right here, Create Sketch. So I can select it from the long list or from the top. Once I have that, I have to choose a plane to sketch on. And this usually doesn't matter so much unless you have a really specific orientation that you want your object to be. Relative to the kind of view cube over here, you can see that this is, the top is it looks like it's the ZX plane is the top, and the front is the YX plane. It looks like. So we could just select any of these planes right now. I'll select the top, which is the ZX plane. Okay, so now we need to make a 2D object. There are a few different, we can take a look at here at the different 2D objects we can make. We can make 2D objects using lines. We can have rectangles, and we can have circles. And these are all, notice that under, as a sub of circles, there's all these different types of ways you could draw a circle. You could draw a circle from the center. You could draw a circle defining 2 points or defining 3 points. We can draw arcs, polygons, ellipses. We can draw a slot or a spline, which is like a curved line. We can even put text in there. And then we can do some other things down here after we have some geometry. So let's start with a circle. So let's do center diameter circle here, C. Once we select a tool, in this case a circle tool, we have over here in the sketch palette, we have a list of kind of settings. So there's a circle. We can choose a type of circle again over here, 2-point circle or center circle. So let's do center diameter circle. Let's select the origin. So you can notice that the pointer kind of locks in when it gets close to the origin. So it locks in right there. And so I'm going to click the center and I'm going to pull it away. And let's make this 4 inches. And enter. So notice that when I was pulling the circle away, we had the little the dimension in there was highlighted, and then I put in a value, just typed it on the keyboard and push enter. Okay, so now let's finish the sketch and let's bring this into 3 dimensions. So in order to do that, under create, I have these different options. So extrude is really just kind of like pulling it up along one axis. Revolving is spinning it around a certain axis. Sweeping can take a profile like this circle and draws it in 3 dimensions along another geometry. There's loft, which makes a 3D object based on 2 separate 2D objects that are some distance away from each other. And those are kind of the main ones. Notice that you can also actually make these kind of like basic shapes here: box, cylinder, sphere, torus, coil, and pipe, just on their own without having to create a 2D object first. But we are going to just work with this. So let's do a simple extrusion. Extrude, or we see the E next here to the extrude. That means hotkey E. So I'm going to hit E on the keyboard, and it's going to bring up the extrude menu here. And I can give it a distance. I can either pull this arrow a certain distance, or I can tell it an amount. I'm going to say 2 inches. And operation is new body. It's making a new body. And click OK. Okay, so now I have my 3-dimensional object. And say I want to make some modifications to this. So let's say that actually this thing is supposed to fit on the end of a square piece, right? So I want to draw a square it comes off the end of this. And so in order to do that, I can start with another 2D object. So I'm going to say create sketch. And instead of choosing one of the original planes, I can actually select the surface of this 3D object. So I'm going to select that top surface right there. And now I want to make a rectangle. So I can go to create rectangle. And here are my options: 2-point rectangle, 3-point rectangle, or center rectangle. I'm going to choose center rectangle. You could do the other ones, but center rectangle is going to be easiest because I want to go from the center, and I want the rectangle to be centered on the origin as well. So click the center, and I pull the rectangle out, and I see that I can give it dimensions here. So I'm going to, before I click anything, I'm going to type in the number 5 and hit tab on my keyboard. So that's going to lock in the 5 on the one side, and it's going to take me to the other dimension. I'm also going to say 5 there. Great. And now it is actually locked in place, and I can't move it any place else. I can either hit enter, or I can just click. So I'll hit enter. And there it is. We have a 5x5 square. Now I'm going to finish that sketch. And I want to extrude this shape away from the circle. So I'm going to go to create extrude. And now I have 2 different geometries I can select. So I can say just this geometry, and it would just be the outside, but I actually wanted to fill in this hole here. So I'm also going to click on that inside geometry too, and it's going to make one solid shape that comes out of that shape. Okay, and I'm going to make that 1 inch, so I'm just going to type in 1 and hit enter. Okay, now I have my shape here. And I need to do a few things to this shape. I'm going to take these sharp corners and I'm going to turn them into rounded corners. And there's different ways of doing that. The easiest way of doing that is under the modify section here. So if I go to modify, these are all things that I can do to objects after I've made them. So I can press or pull different geometries to make them larger or smaller, like faces or things like that. I can make a fillet, I can make a chamfer. We'll go over what those are. I can make the whole body into a shell. So I can make a solid cube, in this case, into like a shell of a cube. I can scale, I can combine, I can do all kinds of things. I can split something, split one body into two bodies, something like that. So I'm going to create a fillet first. And the fillet is going to be, I'm going to select all four corners here. These are vertical corners. So I'm going to select 1, 2, and then 3. And then I have to orbit around and select 4. And for the radius, I'm going to type in 1. Let's see how that looks. And that looks good. So that's a radius of 1 inch. Okay. All right, so go ahead and click OK. All right, now I want to make a chamfer. So I'm going to go to Modify and Chamfer. And I'm going to select this top edge here. And I'm going to say 0.5. And that's what it makes a chamfer. A chamfer, so if a fillet takes a sharp edge and it rounds it in a curve, a chamfer takes a sharp edge and it kind of turns it in like a 90 degree, turns it into like a 45 degree. You can also specify, if the chamfer is not 45 degrees, you could say that how big these two separate edges are. Like for instance, if this is 0.1 and 0.1, equal distance. But if you had two distances here, it could be 0.1 and 0.5. Or the other way around, it could be like 0.5 and 0.1, like that. Okay, so that's chamfer. It's chamfer and fillet. Okay, next thing we'll do is let's create a, let's make a hole here in the top of this. So to do that, I'm going to go to Create and Hole. It's not entirely necessary to use this function. You can make a hole by drawing a circle and then by extruding it, but the hole kind of gives you a little bit more functionality. In order to use this, I need a 2D geometry to reference. So if I just selected hole, and I say I wanted it to be at the center of that of this circle here, I could maybe select. If I just selected the face of here, it would put the hole where the point was. Let's see what happens if I try and select the origin. It's not actually going to be exactly at the origin because it needs a reference point. So I can select this shape here, and it puts it on that shape. It doesn't put it in the along that center axis. So what I need to do before I make a hole, I'm going to cancel this, is I need to have some geometry there. So in order to do that, I'm going to make a sketch on this face. And because this is a circle here, I think that the geometry is already there. I could create something like a point or a circle and place it at the origin there. Let's just do that. I'm going to put a point right there and then say Finish Sketch. Now I have a geometry that I can use to reference the location of the hole. So I'm going to click on Hole, and I'm going to select that center point. And now I can specify the kind of geometry of this hole. So this is the hole dialog box, and it has things like the extent, the kind of the depth of the hole, the type of the hole. It's a simple hole. Looks like this one was maybe made with a drill bit. It has a conical bottom, but you can have a hole with a counter bore, and you can take out the drill point. You can even have a tapped hole here, and you can specify the type of type of thread that defines the hole. So I'm going to change this to a simple hole. So a hole type simple hole. Diameter, I'm going to say 0.5, half inch. And it looks like this has I'm going to countersink it, which means it basically has a kind of sloped edge, which is good for, sometimes the head of a screw will be sloped like that, right? I can specify the outer diameter here, let's say 0.8, and that makes that slope much bigger. And then you can specify the angle of it as well. 82 degrees is the head angle of a standard screw that's in imperial units. 90 degrees is the head angle of a standard screw that is in metric. Okay. Okay. Looks like we're doing good. So I'm going to call that it, and I'm going to say, okay. Okay, so now there's a hole at the center of my part that has a countersink top to it. Okay, I want to make another part here. Let's see, I'm going to create a pattern. In order to create a pattern, you need to first make an object that's going to be patterned. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to make a sketch here. I'm going to select this lower face right here, and I want this part. I'm going to put a hole right here, and then I'm going to make it go all the way around, so I have a hole in each corner. Now, to get the hole in exactly the right spot, I kind of want it on the line from the center of the hole out to the corner here. So to do that, I'm going to actually draw a reference line. I do this a lot because sometimes the place that I want to put something is not exactly specified by the geometry of the object. So I will make a new geometry just temporarily to kind of help me find that place. So to do that, I'm going to make a line. So I'm going to click line here. I'm going to start at the center, and I'm going to go out to the edge, and I can see that this line snaps into place right there. That is at the center of that arc right there, which is exactly where I want it to be. So I'm going to click there. Now notice this line is solid. Solid lines it's fine to have a solid line, but really just using this line for reference. And so it is nice to have that as a construction line. So we talk about what that means. So I'm going to hit escape really quick to take out the line drawing tool, which is still selected, I could see. Hit escape. Okay. If I click on the line, and then under line type, if I click on construction, it turns into a dotted line. And that's really nice because then I can draw geometry around this. And this geometry that's just for reference doesn't get in the way when I'm trying to do extrusions and things like that. So now I'm going to make a circle. And it's going to be on this line. So you can see it kind of snaps to that line. Now I can click kind of just any point over here and then pull that circle away. And now that circle has a line type solid, non-construction line type. But if I hit escape and I select that again, I can switch between the two. It should be not construction. It should be solid because I'm going to use this to make a hole. So now I'm going to dimension this thing. So click on sketch dimension, click on that hole, and that's going to be 0.25. Let's make that 0.25. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make it a specific distance away from this edge. So I'm going to click sketch dimension, click on that kind of where that line meets that outer curve. And I'm going to click on the center of the circle. And you can see that I can actually have a couple different geometries. Dimensions, I can say with the vertical dimension, horizontal dimension, or the kind of diagonal dimension. So let's change that diagonal dimension to 0.5 and hit enter. Okay, now I'm going to finish the sketch. All right, So I want to make that to a hole. I could do it using the hole option, or I could just do extrude. Click extrude, click on that circle, and I'm just going to pull it all the way through, just like that. Real simple. Click OK. And when you extrude something, when you extrude a geometry into another geometry that already exists, it'll be a cut. So I'm going to look down here at that extrusion I just did just to look at those details. I'm going to double click. It's in the design history on the bottom. I'm going to double click it, and I can see that under operation here. So I can actually make it a new body and make it a solid body. I can have it join it to the other geometry that's there, or I can have it cut. Okay. So it's cutting, click OK. Now what I want to do is I want to take that small circle and I want to make one in each corner. Now the easiest way to do this is to make a circular pattern. So to do that, I'm going to create pattern, circular pattern. Patterns are really nice because especially if you have a lot of different objects that you want to be in an array or in some kind of circular pattern, you could just do it like this and you don't have to draw them all individually. So once I do that, the circular pattern dialog box comes up here. Under objects, object type is bodies, and this isn't actually a body really. It's more of like it's a face or it's a feature. So I'm going to change from bodies to either faces or features. I think that either one of those will work here. So let's try features. Under objects, I'm going to zoom in and select the face of that hole. So that is the body it is going to create a circular pattern with, or that is the feature. Now for axis, click select, and it needs the center axis that it's going to rotate around. And a lot of these vertical lines can be axes. I can even select this geometry out here, or any of these circular geometries that are based around the center, or I can select the axis, the y-axis right there. So if I click on the y-axis, then I get my circular pattern. And I'm going to look at this from the top. Click on the view cube to get a view on the edge. Now, it's not in every corner because this is just 3 objects. So it's making a pattern of 3. But if I increase that to 4, go up to 4, it should put 1 in each corner, which is nice. And click OK. And now I have a hole in each corner. Okay. Okay, so I think that's enough for a single object here. Now, one of the things in Fusion that is important when you're making multiple objects is to have them be separate components. So let's talk a little bit about what that means. So this right here, this object is a body. And if I click on it, I can see where that body is in the browser bar on the side. If I click this, expand that, I can see there it is right there. I can turn it off and turn it back on, things like that. A component is basically a collection of different bodies. And you can do things between components that you can't do between bodies that are in the same component. So a lot of times it's really nice to have the different objects in your file, if there's more than one, if they're going to interact with each other or be aligned with each other in any way, to have them be separate components. So we didn't do that with the first one. It's kind of part of the root component. We could actually make it its own component right now, even though we probably should have done this from the beginning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this into its own component. I'm going to find where it says body here in the browser bar, right click it and say create components from bodies. I can see that it's component 1 right here. So I'm just going to call it part 1. Okay, there's part 1. Let's make a second part. And to do that, I want to make a new component. So now we can see that this is its own component right here. I'm going to make a second component that's going to go below it. If I expand this component, it has its own bodies inside of that component. I know it's a little bit specific the way that we're talking about components and bodies. It's just the way that Fusion does it, and it's specific to it. So once you get the hang of it, it's not that big of a deal. So I'm going to right click on the root component at the very top. I'm going to right click where it says CAD example. It's the name of our file. Up here in the browser bar, right click on CAD example and say new component. And this is how you're going to make a new component, ideally before you started drawing it. You can give it a name here. I'm going to call it part 2. And click OK. And now I have a second part. Now notice that this one has become slightly invisible, a little bit ghost-like, right? And that's so that I can work on the second part. And that what happens is that the active part is the one that is the solid color, and then the inactive components have are kind of like ghost-like this. So if I wanted to actually activate a different component, I'm going to go to part 1, and there's a little circle next to part 1, and I'm going to click that circle next to it, and it'll activate that component. And the really important part here is that if you ever want to make a change to a component, it has to be the active one. Otherwise, changes will apply to a different component. So if I wanted to start drawing on part 2, I wouldn't do it here. I would have to activate part 2 first. If I wanted to just have all of the components be active together, I could and I want to see them all together without some of them being kind of invisible like this, I'd activate the root component, which is up here at the top. So I can do that right next to CAD example, click on activate component, and then all my components are active. Okay, so let's make a second part here, part 2.1. And I'm going to, let's see what we're going to do. Let's use the revolve tool, which is a nice tool to use. Then we can align these two parts up later. So in order to use the revolve, I'm going to create a sketch. So click create sketch. The active component is the second component. And I'm going to click on one of these faces. Let's click on this plane right here, which is the YZ plane. And click on that. Nope. What that did was activated the top. I'm going to do Control or Command Z to undo that. I'm going to try that again. I'm going to create a sketch. And what happened was I was trying to select that plane, but it's inside of the body, inside of that object. So it just selected the surface of the object. So I can either turn that part off visibly, or I can zoom out until I can select the plane again. Either way. But I'm going to turn that body off real quick, turn the part 1 off, and I can select this plane here. And I could turn the part back on if I wanted to. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to create a rectangle. Let's do a 2-point rectangle. And I'm going to make something down here below this other part, and it's going to be off of the center line a little bit. And I'm going to make a rectangle that is 1 inch wide, and hit tab to go to 2 inches there, and click enter. Now I'm going to want this to be a certain distance from the center. So I'm going to go to sketch dimension right here, or just hit the hotkey D. And I want this line right here to be a certain distance away from the origin. So I'm going to click the origin point here. And I can specify this distance here. I'm going to call that 1. And enter. So move that rectangle 1 inch away from the vertical distance from the origin. Okay, now I actually want there to be a kind of arc over here on this side. We're basically going to make it kind of like a donut with like a flat inside surface or cylindrical inside surface. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to create arc. 3-point arc is fine. And I'm going to start with the top corner and then the bottom right corner. And then you specify a distance out here. So if you go out to a certain point, you can see right there, I get these little circles with lines next to them. And that means that the circle that I just drew is now tangent to the horizontal lines that are adjacent to it. So I'm going to click there. And I see that I get that tangency constraint right there, which is the circle with the line next to it. Okay. I can also, if you look in the constraints bar up here, this is a pretty nice way to define different geometries relative to each other without having to define by specific numbers. So I can make 2 circles concentric by clicking concentric, can make 2 things on the midpoint. If I go to tangent, I can click tangent, and this might over constrain it, I'm not sure, but if I click on this circle and this horizontal line, it gives me an error because it's over constrained because it's already a tangent. But if that wasn't tangent, I could do that. I hit escape to get rid of that tool. This is a constraint right here, this tangency constraint that happened. If I didn't want that to be there, if I didn't want it to be constrained like that, I could right click on the constraint and delete it. And then it's not there, and then I could actually move this thing around. I could then go back to constraints and go back to tangency and make this geometry tangent with this geometry. And it would be back there again, and I get that tangency constraint up there. Okay, so now I want to revolve essentially this geometry around the center, but I have this line in the middle. You can leave that there and just select 2 geometries and then make the concentric, but you can also trim geometry from your overall geometry if you don't want it. So it'd be under the modify and trim, or the hotkey T. And I could select any of these geometries, and when it turns red, it means it would cut it. So if I select this vertical line here and I click, it will subtract that line from the hole. Trim is like really nice, especially when you're making more complex geometry. Okay, we're going to finish that sketch. And now we're going to revolve this geometry around the center. So I'm going to go to Create, Revolve. For profile, I already selected that profile because it's probably because it's the only one there. For axis, you can select the center origin axis, this like green y-axis right here. I'm going to zoom in and select that. So when an object is blue highlighted like this, it means that that's what it's waiting for you to specify. So I'm going to click that line there, and I see we have this geometry which has been created, and click OK. All right. So now I have my 2 parts, and they're in 2 components, and I can activate different components, or I can activate the root component. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to do a few more things in here. There really are so many different things you can do in the Design Workspace. It's just too much to go over in a short video. And really what we're going to do here with this channel is we're going to, through a series of projects, kind of teach you, a bunch of these different things in different ways. Like, it's a very project-based kind of way of learning. So we're going to get to that, but I'll just do a few more things here in order to show a few things that I use a lot. So I'm gonna I want to move. Say I want to move one of these things. In order to do that, you can go to Modify and Move Copy. So if you click Move Copy, you can select the geometry you want to move. Say I want to move this one, and say I want to move it over here. You can specify the amount that you want to move it. I can move it up here as well. Notice that there's these kind of arrows that'll pull it along an axis, or if you select one of these squares, it'll move it in a plane, or these kind of arrows here will rotate it around. And this is okay way of moving things apart from each other or towards each other, but their relative geometry is now totally lost. So if I click OK, now the center line of this circle or that cylinder is not at the center line of this cylinder anymore. So we would have to do something to make that happen again, which we will in a second. But one more thing I wanted to show you is that something that's nice about the Move Copy is that you can hit Move Copy, you could select a geometry, and then if you click this Create Copy button right here, before you move it, then when it moves it, it'll actually just move the copy over. So you have two of these parts in there. That's one way of making two of something, but there are, you can also create patterns as well. In the same way that we created the pattern of holes that went around, we could create a pattern of objects. You can make an array of objects, a circular pattern or a rectangular pattern or a pattern on a path. Okay. So last thing we're going to do here is we are going to realign these things. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to do that with the assemble joint function. So these objects are not in a specific location to each other anymore, or specific position relative to each other anymore. Since they are separate components, we can actually make a joint between two of their geometries that will kind of put them in a specific relationship to each other. So I'm going to go to Assemble and Joint. And we have the joint dialog box here, and this is going to be between two components. Notice that one of these kind of grays out here, and I can't do anything with that one because I think it's because I can't make a joint between two of the two bodies in the same component. So let's select, it's asking for the first one here. So component one, I'm going to say the center of this geometry of this cylinder here. So if I select on the surface of the cylinder, it'll select that, and then it's actually, I need to select where in that cylinder, top, middle, or bottom. And I'm going to say the top. So that was actually, in order to select the correct point there, I had to select two separate things. And same thing over here. Now it's prompting me for the second component. I'm going to select this geometry here, and then it's asking me which part of that geometry. I'm going to say the top of that. And notice that it puts those things kind of together. It maybe did it in the wrong orientation. So there's this flip button here, which is useful. It flips it on the other side. And you can kind of either pull it in to a different distance away. But now the center of those, or the axis of those two separate cylinders are aligned again. One more thing that we're going to set here is the motion. So in the motion section, we could set all these different types of motion. So let's see. I think this one should be cylindrical. So rigid means that it's going to be kind of not move. So after I set this position, they would not move relative to each other. Cylindrical means they would move relative to each other, but only along that central axis. So I'm going to click OK. And then there these two parts are, and this part will move, but only along that central axis. And let's do the same thing with this one here. So I'm going to go to Assemble and Joint. And I'm going to select the center of this axis right here, and then the center of this axis right here. Okay, I'm going to flip that over and click OK. And now I have both of these kind of donuts here, and they can move relative to each other, but not along that line. And notice, this is interesting, this one doesn't move. And what's happening here is that this is a interesting little thing, is that when I created this second body here, I did it with a move copy, and I was in the top, I was in the root kind of component, and so when I did that, it put that body in the root component. So if I look at this body right here and I see it's actually under the root component, it's not under part 2. Part 2 is separate. So if I wanted to, say if I was in part 2 and I wanted to do a move copy with this one here, with this body here, and create a copy and then move it around and click OK. Now that new body would also be in part 2. But that's an example of the idea that depending on which component is the active component is the component that things get applied to. Okay. Now, one more thing to notice is that, those two components, those two bodies move together because they're in the same component. They won't move relative to each other because you can't make joints between bodies in the same component. You can only make joints between separate components. Okay, so that was a little kind of bit of a journey into the design workspace. There's going to be a lot more that we're going to do in the design workspace. That was really kind of more of like an overview, a way to draw a few parts and kind of like see how some of these tools worked. The more we spend with the projects, we're going to be doing CAD drawings for each one of the projects, and we'll go through a lot more of these different possible tools. But that's the kind of basic way that this is all set up with the parts, the bodies, the components, the joints between the components and things like that. But we will do more interesting ones in the future. These ones are just kind of random ones that I made up on the fly. So that is it for introduction to the design workspace in Fusion. And go ahead and next we're going to talk about the manufacturer workspace in Fusion, which is where we're going to make all of our toolpaths for computer-aided manufacturing, or for kind of programming CNC machines to make things. So look for that one next.